A young girl is forced into marriage with an old count against her will, but she falls in love with his son, who has a dark secret. Watch until the end to find out what it is. Subscribe to the channel and like the video to support my work. The man grabbed the girl by the face and exclaimed, "Linnaeus!" as if trying to pull her out of a long, oppressive silence. He touched her neck, gently pulling her toward him, and whispered, "You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." He threw his leg over her body and braced his hands on either side of her waist. Taking off his shirt, the man revealed his toned abs. The next moment, he stared at Linnea, but her face showed not surprise, but rather muted disappointment. He lifted her hand and slowly placed it on his chest, as if wanting her to feel the strength of his body. He ran her fingers over himself, bringing her hand to his lips. His warm lips touched her skin. His gaze flashed, and Linnea's heart trembled under the pressure of those eyes. He gently grabbed her legs and slowly pulled her closer. His palm slid higher up her leg, squeezing her thighs harder and harder. Somewhere on the table, a phone rang loudly, sharply attracting the man's attention. Linnea flinched at the sound, her eyes widening in fear. He got up from the bed and went to the phone, but she stopped him with the words, "Wait, please." His gaze darkened, his body tensed, and his hands clenched tighter. He loomed over her, and the girl thought, "Is this all just my father's whim?" She tried to cover herself with her hands, turning away without looking at him. Linnea thought, "I agreed to this marriage only because I desperately wanted to survive." Her veil was luxurious, and her dress beautifully accentuated her best features. She remembered looking with her green eyes at the groom in his formal black suit, waiting ahead. But this man had caused her more pain than anyone else ever had. His cold reserve frightened Lena, even though he was now her lawful husband. On her thigh was a belt with a small but extremely strong lock, a chastity belt, a symbol of their marriage. For Linnea, this marriage had turned into hell, and she could not even imagine what the future held for her. She was beaten with a leather whip, and fear gripped her whole body. When she ended up in this family, from which she could no longer escape, her frightened eyes slid over the whip, and she almost lost consciousness from the pain and horror. But besides the man she was married to, there was someone else in Linnea's life. Alexis, her only hope, always appeared to save, support, and protect her when no one else could. But at the same time, they were from opposite worlds. It seemed that Alexis was a vampire, and Linnea was like a living vessel of blood for him. In the end, the girl realized that she couldn't help falling in love with this handsome man from the moment she saw him. Her green eyes stared into the distance again. She sat on a chair, and opposite her stood a man who said, "We must not allow ourselves to have feelings for people like them." His gaze suddenly met hers, piercing through her, and at the same time his voice continued, "They are too different from us." He explained that it was not love, but only a sick desire to possess. The man begged her to stop, think carefully, and run away. But that same night, Linnea was back in bed with Alexis. She whispered that they had to stop, otherwise they would be exposed and pay for everything they had done. But he, as if not hearing her, only slowed down a little, not intending to back down. After a short silence, Linnea whispered, "We are family." Then she added even more quietly, "We can't do that." He gently pushed her hair back so it wouldn't get in the way, and tried to get even closer to her. With a sudden movement, he broke the lock on her thigh. It fell to the floor with a faint clink. For him, Linnea had long since ceased to be just family. She had become something much more. He leaned down to touch her seductive lips with his sweet lips. They melted into each other's arms and kisses, tender and passionate at the same time, until the windows fogged up from the heat of their desire. Later, someone walked down the road, slowly, without haste. It was Linnea. She stopped by a lamppost on the deck of the ship and whispered, "The day has come." Her eyes shone with joy, and her luxurious hair was tangled in the wind, flying around her. She was deeply saddened by her separation from home. It hurt her to simply leave, not knowing if she would ever return, or if there would even be any point in returning. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to a stone with a mysterious golden mark on it. Linnea stared at the strange pattern. A man with glasses was engraved on the stone, and the pattern resembled a compass, but had many small details. Somewhere in her memory, an ancient voice rang out, "Say hello to Linnea." A little girl stood timidly next to a tall man, who said, "From now on, she will live with us." Linnea shyly hid her hands and whispered, "Hello." Another girl stood opposite her, her face contorted with anger. "No! Let her go back to where she came from." Ashamed, Linnea pressed her forehead against the man's leg, trying to hide from the hurtful words. After all, she no longer had a home. After her parents' death, her uncle took her in, forcing her to work in his trade guild. But now, Linnea could leave that life behind. She walked down the street, and whispers echoed around her. My God, it's true. That crazy merchant, blinded by money. The bustle of the market hummed around her, for everyone knew who she was. Someone called her name, trying to talk to her. Linnea stopped and approached the men, who asked, "Are you really going north?" She had long dreamed of boarding one of the ships in the harbor and leaving this place forever. Linnea smiled, hiding the pain of her memories. Gripping the handle of her suitcase, she replied confidently, "Yes, I'm leaving. Goodbye. I'm getting married." Today, her dream was about to come true. Soon, Linnea was sitting in a carriage rushing north. It seemed incredible to her that she had decided to travel such a long way alone. She only hoped that she would not regret her choice. After all, if she had stayed in the south, her life would never have changed. The sky was gradually darkening, and the sunset painted it in soft orange hues. A few hours later, the carriage stopped. Linnea had arrived in the north. A maid in a black and white uniform offered her a hand, helping her out. Suddenly, someone caught her attention with the words, "Welcome, Mrs. Linnea." Turning around, she saw a friendly woman. "I am Sophia, the housekeeper of the Mattei estate." Linnea was embarrassed, confused by the impression, but Sophia kindly offered to show her to her room. The girl was still speaking in fragments, while Sophia smiled and instructed the servants to carry her suitcases. One of the maids picked up a suitcase, and Linnea tried to take it back, but Sophia calmly pointed out that it was their job. Sophia paused for a moment, then said, "After all, you will soon be a countess." These words were etched in Linnea's memory. Everyone understood the hint and moved toward the main entrance. Sophia began to explain calmly. "The dining room and bathrooms are on the first floor, and on the second floor is your office and the rooms you will share with His Highness." Linnea became curious to learn more about him, so she timidly asked. Sophia replied calmly, "He is strict but caring. You have nothing to worry about." But suddenly, her tone changed and became serious. She squeezed Linnea's hand and said, "Never go up to the third floor without permission." The girl's gaze darted slightly, but she tried to remain calm. Sophia smiled again and added gently, "You see, that's His Excellency's private office. We all try not to go in there." Her soft tone calmed Lena a little, and she agreed to start preparing for the meeting with her fiancé. Even before Lena's arrival, she was informed that since it was a marriage of convenience, all the formalities would be completed quickly, but something went wrong. Now she sat naked in the middle of the hall, begging to be allowed to put on the dress herself, without Sophia's help. The servant was slightly taken aback and asked, "Can you wash, dress, and do your hair yourself?" It sounded as if she couldn't even manage to take a shower without her maids. But Sophia gently insisted, "Let me help you. You will soon be a countess, so you must look your best on such a solemn day." Linnea swallowed hard. Sophia made her feel uneasy. Finally, she left and called another maid to help Linnea get ready. The girl sat in the bathtub, curled up in a ball, feeling a burning discomfort in her body and soul. After bathing, Sophia began applying makeup, instructing her where to turn her head, how to close her eyes, and how to relax her lips. Linnea's hands and face trembled with excitement, and Sophia decided that she simply did not trust her. The makeup brush hurt her skin, but finally, everything was ready. Sophia announced that the ceremony would take place at night. Linnea was surprised, but the woman replied, "It's not unusual, especially since the days are very short here." The girl looked in the mirror, assessing her makeup, and Sophia added, "And there's no need to have a loud party until morning, right?" Linnea nervously clutched the fabric of her dress, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Sophia said quietly, "It's silly to be proud of marrying a commoner." The woman looked closely at Linnea and her freshly applied makeup. Meanwhile, the girl was barely holding back her tears, afraid of ruining her painted face. She made up an excuse to leave the room so that if she cried, she would have time to fix everything. Turning quickly, Linnea rushed to the door, trying to hide from her sudden embarrassment. In her mind, she admitted that there was probably a grain of truth in Sophia's words. It seemed as if the servants enjoyed mocking her and her comical appearance. But just outside the door, Linnea bumped into a stranger who was blocking her way. Her legs buckled and she staggered. The man instantly supported her by the waist, holding her in his arms. They froze, looking at each other, not understanding what had just happened. Linnea's green eyes were shining, either from tears or from something unknown. Silence reigned between them, as if both were waiting for the other to speak first. Linnea wondered who this man was, and how he had ended up at the estate. The stranger leaned toward her slightly, Perhaps he had simply lost his balance, or perhaps something else had caused him to move closer. Linnea began to apologize confusedly, her words lost in embarrassment. But suddenly, a strand of hair caught on his sleeve and pulled her sharply, and she hit her head on his shoulder again. She began to apologize awkwardly, trying to smooth things over. When Linnea pulled her hair toward her, his hand gently caught her palm, stopping her movement. His fingers were ice cold, and it made her shiver. But at the same time, there was the same tenderness and purity in this touch as in the first snow. He gently reached for her chin, but Linnea recoiled slightly. But the man gently held her chin, and the girl's heart began to beat wildly. A thought flashed through her mind. Could this be my fiancé? Alexis apologized for his sudden appearance and wiped the smudged lipstick from her lips, saying, "I'm sorry. My father won't be happy to see this." Linnea blinked in confusion. Was he talking about his father? So this man wasn't her fiancé after all? After saying this, Alexis pulled a wedding dress from behind his back and showed it to Linnea. Sophia approached slowly and said solemnly, "How kind of you, Mr. Alexis, to help with the wedding preparations." He did not reply, but remained silent until Sophia added, "Thanks to you, your stepmother will not be late for the ceremony." And then Linnea realized, standing before her was the son of her future husband, her future stepson. His gaze slid over her from bottom to top, as if assessing every detail. The girl apologized awkwardly once more, covering her mouth with her hands in embarrassment. But Alexis did not respond to her apology, saying only briefly, "See you in the ceremony hall." He slowly backed away and moved in the opposite direction. Linnea watched him go, but Sophia interrupted her thoughts. Handsome, isn't he? Many were surprised that the heir to the Mattei family was so young and attractive. His posture and impeccable hairstyle seemed to be the epitome of male beauty. The young man lifted his shirt with a lipstick stain and stared at it. After a short silence, he said quietly, "I admit, many women can't take their eyes off the groom after the wedding." Sophia began to ask Linnea about Alexis, but the girl did not want to discuss him, especially with her. Calmly turning away, Linnea replied, "It's inappropriate to talk about such things on the eve of a wedding." Sophia agreed and decided to focus on preparing for the ceremony. The girl left, leaving her alone among her belongings and slight disorder. It was already dark outside, and additional candles were lit in the mansion to light the way. Linnea was dressed in a luxurious white dress, with a weightless veil and a bouquet in her hands. Her attention was drawn to someone who entered the hall, a male figure. An elegant man in a formal suit, with a few wrinkles on his face, stopped in front of her. She noticed that all the members of this family had black hair and crimson eyes, but Alexis exuded a completely different, special aura. Linnea felt unhappy next to him. The Count greeted her, and she responded politely. Keeping his back perfectly straight, he said, "I hear you've already met my son, yes?" Linnea thought that his words might have annoyed the Count, so she hastened to explain. "We only saw each other for a moment, a very brief moment." Suddenly, the man sharply lifted her chin, examining her face as if he were evaluating a porcelain doll. He turned her head to the left, then to the right, and then sighed. "Indeed, quite good." He sighed lightly again and added, "Now I understand why Alexis said what he said." Alexis filled Linnea's thoughts again. She didn't understand what she was feeling. Maybe it was just something like maternal warmth, or maybe it was something she had been trying to suppress. Only a few of those present watched them, observing how the Count assessed every feature of his bride. Finally, he removed his hand, ending this strange examination. But just then, Alexis appeared in the hall and stopped opposite them, silently watching the wedding. Someone called Linnea's name, drawing her attention. It was the Count who suggested starting the ceremony. The girl looked around. The priest was waving a black censer. Everything around her was gloomy and a little frightening, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel excited. It was a new city, a new life. An unpleasant smell spread throughout the estate, irritating Linnea. They were served a shared cup of the sacred drink, which was supposed to purify the soul. The Count solemnly said, "May the breath of God purify our essence, and may his blood strengthen our union." The girl was frightened by this ritual, but she held on, doing everything as she should. She took a sip of the liquid called the blood of God. Her head began to spin from the strange taste. Linnea grimaced and bowed her head, barely suppressing her disgust. She had expected the taste of wine, but it wasn't even remotely edible. The Count lifted her chin again. "What's the matter? Do you want to stop the ceremony?" In her mind, she would gladly have fled this gloomy place, where she felt like a worthless girl in the dark, but she knew that running away would ruin everything. so she quietly replied, "No, Your Highness. I don't want to stop the ceremony." The next moment, she forced herself to drink the strange liquid, barely restraining the urge to scream in disgust. She realized that there would be no carefree life and rooms with golden chandeliers here. She remembered the support of her friends and the few people she had dared to tell about the wedding. Her lips slowly peeled away from the disgusting glass. Linnea carefully wiped her mouth so as not to smudge her lipstick. The Count smiled slightly. The corners of his mouth barely moved, but the smile seemed expressive. He solemnly said, "With the blessing of Tiab, I now pronounce us husband and wife." The ring was slowly slipped onto her finger. It sparkled so brightly that it reflected the moonlight. The man was pleased that Linnea was now part of his family. In a moment, he was calling her, "my dear wife." The Count was about to say something special, and Linnea waited for these words, pressing her hand with the ring to her chest. But for her, it was not a love story, but only a test of endurance. Sophia and Alexis stood in the hall, watching the ceremony intently. In Alexis's opinion, Linnea seemed strange, too different from the others, as if she were a little unnatural. He decided it was because of the exhausting journey, winding roads, skinny animals along the roadside, dead fields without grass or vegetables. But he understood that she was just a doll in her father's hands. She had been bought and sold, and yet her eyes troubled him. They shone so brightly that he wanted to look at them endlessly. The ceremony continued. The bride and groom stood at the table, and among the guests were only Sophia and Alexis. But suddenly, something distracted Linnea again, and at the same time caught Alexis's eye. He realized that the bride and groom would walk across the spread tablecloth to the other end of the hall, so he politely stepped aside, giving them room to pass. But something still bothered him. Every time he looked at her, his heart was filled with a strange, incomprehensible feeling that he couldn't even explain to himself. The candles went out one by one. The ceremony could not last forever. Soon, Linnea had changed her clothes and was standing in her room, looking out the window into the distance. She touched the glass pane, watching the foggy spot from her fingers melt away. Linnea remembered the Count's words. Now they were family, but she didn't want this artificial family. The Count entered the room calmly, without a word, and stood in the doorway, as if waiting for an invitation from his new wife. His formal suit looked impeccable, emphasizing all the features that made him so respectable. He slowly began to close the door, hiding one hand behind his back so that Linnea couldn't see what was there. And in that hand was a leather belt with a metal buckle. A month ago, Linnea looked ahead anxiously and asked, "Do you really want me to get married?" The man opposite replied, "That's right, Linnea. You've stayed here long enough. It's time to stop working for our guild." He added, "I've already decided who you're going to marry. He's a little older, but he's an aristocrat." The Mattei family was a respected family of counts from the north, but Linnea did not understand why he wanted a wife from the common people who had worked for the guild all her life. Her husband said quietly, "You've always dreamed of leaving this place. They need a quiet bride. In return, they will give us titles and property." And finally, he made his main argument, "I've taken care of you for so many years. Isn't it time to be rewarded for all that?" A ring with a red stone was already sparkling on her finger. Returning from her memories, she looked at the man standing in front of her, who was studying her face intently. Linnea timidly grabbed the edge of her dress. Should I take it off or what? But he just gently ran his hand over her shoulder and quietly said that everything would be fine. "Leave it to me," the man added. He put his arm around her waist, and Linnea's hands fell limply, offering no resistance. They lay down on the bed, the Count on top, she underneath, staring at his face. He leaned closer, but did not kiss her. A metal object clinked quietly in his hands. No, something was wrong. Everything should have been different. Linnea didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, she felt a cold metal ring on her leg, jingling in his hands. A leather belt with a metal clasp, tightly wrapped around her leg, fastened so tightly that it couldn't slip off. The girl's body was paralyzed with fear. She couldn't move, feeling completely helpless. But despite everything, she found the strength to push the man away, even though she knew she had to obey him in everything. But the Count remained calm, saying only quietly, "My dear wife, have you forgotten the terms of our marriage?" Seeing her reaction, he realized that she did not know all the rules, and added, "Your uncle just wanted money and a comfortable life too much." The Count gently took Linnea by the hand and calmly asked, "What do you think will happen to you if you do not fulfill your marital duty?" Linnea's head spun. She realized that she had simply been sold. She understood that now she had to obey everything the Count said, feeling like nothing more than a commodity in his hands. She remembered her uncle, her old room in the basement, and his heavy footsteps behind the door. She remembered all the details of that agreement, having finally lost trust and realizing that there was no way out, the Count's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. He was holding her hand, and when he noticed that her gaze was wandering, he said, "With your permission, shall I continue?" Feeling terrible, Linnea just nodded in response. The lock on her leg clicked, ominously reminiscent of a prison. The Count leaned toward her ear and whispered with a slight smile, "That's good." Then he got up from the bed, walked over to the window, and without looking back said, "I don't ask much of you. Just remain chaste and devout, as befits a countess. Do you understand?" Of everything he said, Linnea clung to these words about chastity and piety. She was surprised by this, because the Count was her husband, and she expected everything to be like in ordinary married couples. The Count turned to her. "You've probably heard of the Tiabgan faith?" Linnea replied confusedly. "Only that it is practiced in the Inalese Empire." He sighed and waved his hand reluctantly, as if to say that she was still too inexperienced to become part of the family. Then he announced that he would entrust Sophia with teaching her all the traditions and customs of the aristocracy. He sincerely believed that, in time, Linnea would become intelligent and be able to create a real family with him. The girl herself was not happy about this news. Now she had to share her faith with everyone else. When morning came, sunlight slowly spread throughout the room. Only Linnea and her two maids, Sophia and a quiet girl of the lowest rank, sat at breakfast. She looked delicate and refined, as befitted a countess, but Linnea was constantly thinking about yesterday and hardly touched her food, which worried the servants. "Is the food not to your liking?" But she assured them that everything was fine. After a pause, the girl timidly asked, "Will His Excellency or anyone else from the family be joining us for dinner?" Sophia smiled gently. "They rarely eat together. His Excellency gets up before dawn, and Mr. Alexis usually skips breakfast altogether." Linnea thought that this was even better. It would be unbearable for her to sit next to the Count in oppressive silence. But suddenly, Sophia remembered something and looked at the girl again. "By the way," she said, "it seems that Mr. Alexis was looking for you." Linnea's face turned pale. She was nervous, not knowing why or where she was being called. She thought it might have something to do with what he had recently told the Count, the words the Count had uttered. Twisting her head like a doll's at the ceremony, Sophia suggested meeting him, and Linnea wondered where he might be. At that moment, Alexis had just come out of the shower. He looked impeccable, even though he was only her stepbrother. Linnea stood at the door of his chambers, waiting for a response to her knock. She remembered Sophia's instructions about which door to find. Finally, the girl entered the spacious, bright room. Something immediately caught her attention. There was a smell of sulfur and clouds of steam in the air, and when Linnea stepped further, her foot landed in a small container of water, similar to a hydrobarrier. Hearing the splash, Alexis came closer. "Who's there?" Realizing that he was in the room, Linnea hastily began to apologize for the intrusion. She covered her mouth with her hand when she saw him through the steam. His perfect body made it impossible to look away. Alexis's gaze met hers, as if reminding her that she hadn't come here to admire him. They stood silently, waiting for the first one to speak. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Sophia said you wanted to see me," explained Linnea, barely able to contain her excitement. Suddenly, she caught her foot on the hem of her dress and staggered. Linnea closed her eyes, preparing for the fall, but Alexis caught her by the waist and prevented her from hitting the floor. The girl sat down, trying to calm down, but her heart was pounding wildly. Her words were jumbled and barely came out of her mouth. Alexis looked at her leg, which was red and seemed a little swollen, and carefully removed her shoe to check. Linnea quietly cried out in discomfort, but quickly assured him that she was fine and that her foot was just a little tired. Linnea's eyes shone with a bright green light, deep, clear, full of kindness and gentleness. She watched as Alexis carefully removed her shoes, checking for pain or injury. "I'm sorry, I didn't expect to find you undressed," said Linnea, but Alexis replied that he had just taken a bath. She looked around and he added, "It's a steam room. The steam comes from heated marble. A relative of mine invented it. There was so much steam because it cleansed the body." Alexis looked her up and down. "You'll be extremely uncomfortable here in that outfit." He took her firmly by the arms, helping her up from the floor. "Don't move and stand up straight," he said. He slowly unfastened the clasps of her dress, freeing her from the tight corsets and straight posture. Linnea almost fainted from shock, her eyes wide open as if the world were about to collapse. She clung to his back, but he quietly told her that everything would be fine and there was no need to worry. "I meant, if you want to be alone, I'd better leave," Alexis explained. "Enjoy your swim," he added, and headed for the exit. Linnea heard the door creak and begin to close. Her cheeks burned with shame and despair. The The girl fell to her knees and burst into tears. It seemed to her that she had gone mad in just a few days at this estate, but suddenly she heard her name behind her. "How did you know I was here?" asked Linnea, and the maid replied, "Mr. Alexis ordered me to help you." The girl looked at her dress and saw that the fabric was wet and heavy. The maid offered to help her change into comfortable clothes for swimming. She reached for the fasteners, but Linnea was suddenly embarrassed. She realized that her heart was beating wildly, only because of the fear Alexis had left behind. She tried to convince herself that this behavior was normal for this family, and yet she couldn't understand whether it was normal for sons to help their mothers undress. Finally, she looked at the maid. "I'd better go back to my room." She tried not to get worked up and not to worry about the situation. Meanwhile, Alexis had already returned to his chambers and changed into comfortable clothes. Sophia was waiting in the hall and smiled. "So, did you have fun? So, you sent her. But why did you lie to her?" Alexis asked coldly, immediately understanding the plan. Sophia laughed quietly, jumped off the table, and said defiantly, "Oh, you mean that?" It seems that Her Highness simply lacked family love. She slowly approached him. "Well, what do you think? Is the fruit as juicy on the inside as it is on the outside?" Alexis grabbed her arm sharply and squeezed it so that she could feel his seriousness. "Enough! Get out of my sight!" he snapped, and Sophia seemed only glad to be banished. He slammed the door and stood there for a few seconds, as if waiting for her to come back with an apology. Then he cursed quietly, slamming his palm against the door. The image of Linnea came back to him. Her hypnotic eyes were impossible to forget. He tried to push those feelings aside, but something kept him from forgetting her. Meanwhile, Linnea sat at the table with a book, reading intently, but soon her gaze slid over the letters without taking in the meaning. Words about chastity, a strange lock on her foot, and incomprehensible family rules swirled in her head. She remembered how Alexis had unbuttoned her dress, and now her conscience was tormenting her. "The Tiabgan faith asserts that inner peace is one of the virtues," she said, turning the pages. The book no longer mattered much. It had become merely a way to clear her mind. She read about sinful desires, the full moon, and strange religious beliefs. The work was about human passions and spiritual values, and the girl continued to turn the pages. A sudden pain in her chest made her clutch her heart, clutching the fabric of her dress. But soon the pain passed, and Linnea blamed it on stress. Loud hoofbeats could be heard outside. A horse was galloping right under the windows of the estate. It did indeed run up to the main entrance. 3 members of the family met him at the door. Alexis looked excited and confused at the same time. The horseman jumped off his horse and smiled cheerfully. "Long time no see, brother. Walter, you should be at the Imperial Palace," the Count said sternly, but the young man just waved his hand, not wanting to explain. "A bunch of fools from the Order of Holy Knights caused a lot of trouble," Walter shrugged. These words only made the Count more curious, even though they offered no explanation. "Even then, I didn't like how they were snooping around the north. And I was right. As soon as they reached the village of Silber, they sent a report to the Emperor, and he summoned the ruler of the north." Walter continued. Events unfolded much faster than anyone expected. Alexis quietly asked Sophia if she knew anything about it, but she just shrugged indifferently. The Count entrusted the management of the estate to his son and ordered him to look after his stepmother while she got used to her new life. "Found yourself a new wife again?" Walter asked. And what kind of naive girl is it this time?" he added sarcastically. "The house will be fine," Alexis replied angrily, glaring at his brother. Meanwhile, the Count was invited to go with Walter to resolve the issue and return. Sophie was ordered to prepare the carriage for departure. Linnea watched everything from the window, watching them walk around the entrance, waiting for the carriage to be ready. When it rolled up, she realized that His Excellency was setting off on his journey. She felt awkward. What if she looked ungrateful if she didn't wish him a safe journey? She drew the curtains, took a flashlight, and went to the door of the estate. Slowly descending the stairs, the girl thought about what to say to the Count before his departure. Outwardly, she seemed calm, but inside she was hesitant. Was it a mistake to go down to him at all? Alexis noticed a shadow with a lantern and decided to see who was wandering around in the middle of the night. The shadow disappeared, and Linnea appeared before him. He froze, confused and bewildered, not expecting to see her here. Moving away from Sophia and the Count, he approached her. "What are you doing here? I saw His Excellency getting ready to go somewhere, and I just wanted to say goodbye and see him," Linnea explained. Alexis remembered her uncle's words, calling her naive and helpless, and suddenly he realized he couldn't let them meet. it would end in disaster. He frantically searched for a way to stop Linnea from going any further. Finally, he said calmly, "No one expects that of you, Mother." He remained standing, waiting for Linnea to turn around and leave. Linnea froze, digesting the fact that she had just been called Mother. She didn't understand why, but all her thoughts vanished when she decided to go to the Count after all. She pushed Alexis away and moved forward, but he said sharply, "No," and grabbed her by the waist, preventing her from taking a step. The flashlight fell from her hand, hit the floor, and the glass shattered into sharp pieces, causing the girl to recoil in panic. A cut appeared on her hand, and soon a thin trickle of blood ran down her skin. She closed her eyes, trying not to look at the wound and gather her strength. Alexis glanced at the debris and asked anxiously if everything was okay. Trying to help his new stepmother, he lifted her hand, but bloody drops were already dripping from her fingers. His face instantly turned pale and covered with sweat. He was trying hard to control himself, and Linnea didn't understand why. He turned away abruptly, covering his mouth and nose with his hands. He leaned on the railing and closed his eyes tightly, as if trying to shut himself off from everything. Go if you want to live," Alexis whispered. Linnea looked at him in confusion, not understanding what was happening to him. "Get out of my sight now!" he shouted a second time, but the girl did not move, only looked at him. She slowly approached him, holding her bloodied hand. His eyes became predatory. Hunger flashed in them like lightning. Alexis didn't understand what was happening to him, trying to hold back, but he grabbed Linnea by the head and pulled her sharply toward him, squeezing her thin wrist. He suddenly realized that he had never felt such a wild desire before. Pain shot through her arm as he bit down hard, trying to taste her blood. His fingers held her hair tightly, pulling her head closer and closer to him. His sharp teeth were almost touching her neck, the pulsing of her veins enticing him, but he didn't have time. The Count and Sophia were already calling him downstairs. Alexis abruptly let her go and dropped to his knees. His eyelids half closed, his gaze clouded over, and in the next moment, he lost consciousness, collapsing right on the steps of the estate. During the red night, eerie sounds came from the estate. A man stood on his knees before the Count, exhausted and weakened, begging for forgiveness. It seemed he had been tortured, but he was willing to do anything to survive. The Count looked at him calmly and mercilessly until he grew tired and said, "You are sentenced to exile for breaking the rules." The bloodless man howled in fear. Another held him down, twisting his arms so he couldn't escape. The Count listened to his pleading cries, but cut them off with the words, "You are not worthy of living under the protection of this society. You succumbed to lust and became a monster." The man continued to beg, but in vain. He was held tightly and could barely breathe. Walter looked down at him mockingly, then let go of his shoulders, allowing him to fall to the floor, and continued to beg humbly for his life. Realizing that there would be no mercy, the man croaked, "Better kill me!" and sharp claws tore his neck, spilling a river of blood. Walter, covered in someone else's blood, smiled and said, "This arrogant guy was asking for it." When it was all over, the Count turned to him and gave an order. He ordered that the victim be brought to the border alive, even if half dead, as long as he was alive. The night was so dark that the moon barely lit the room. Little Alexis was standing by the window when, hearing footsteps, he asked, "Where are you taking him?" He looked sad, but he knew he had to obey his father. "Back to where he came from," replied the Count. Alexis added quietly, "But don't demons live there? Do you think he didn't remember that when he betrayed us? That is why his sin is the gravest," said the Count calmly. The boy nodded restrainedly, as he had been taught, not allowing himself to show any emotion. "Is that surprising, Alexis? We crave their blood just as much," asked his father. "But when we give in to our desires, we become monsters who cannot control their instincts," he added, and that was proof of how dangerous people can be. Suddenly, his name was called from the next room. It was Linnea, and Alexis realized that he had been wandering in his memories all this time. He didn't know why the past had resurfaced just then, but he got up and said he was fine, so his mother wouldn't worry. Alexis cautiously said that he wanted to apologize. He explained that he was trying to protect her and prevent accidental interference in family affairs. Linnea, a little surprised, replied, "Don't worry about it. It was an accident. You didn't mean me any harm." Alexis did not answer, but fell silent. This silence was not empty. A strange feeling inside him was growing stronger and stronger. He did not want to turn into a monster like that unfortunate man who had been tortured for bringing shame on his family. But at the same time, he had a burning desire to tear Linnea to pieces. He bowed his forehead to hers, looking deep into her eyes. His father's words came to mind, and his lips almost touched his stepmother's, but that moment was ruined by Sophia's voice. "What's going on here?" Linnea's heart pounded wildly, and she almost fainted from fright. Sophia slowly approached, the clicking of her thin heels growing louder. "What were you talking about so intimately?" Her nostrils caught the scent of blood, sharp, rich, and she immediately realized that Linnea was wounded. The woman's gaze slid to the thin red stripe on the girl's arm. She said that the wound needed to be treated immediately to avoid infection. Sophia smiled and whispered, "Your body no longer belongs only to you, ma'am." Then she smiled even wider and slowly said, "Isn't that right, Alexis?" As if stretching out every syllable of his name. Alexis froze, trying to control himself. They went to the room where Sophia treated the cut and gave Linnea painkillers. Sophia asked if there were any hidden injuries under her dress, on her shoulders or back. Linnea was about to smile and leave, but suddenly stopped. A sudden sharp pain pierced her chest, the same as when she was reading the scriptures, Sophia asked anxiously, but Linnea was embarrassed. "It must have been my imagination. I'm just exhausted." She immediately felt ashamed of her words, but it was too late. She had to listen to the advice. But Sophia did not give any advice, instead talking about the 4 parts of the Tiabgan writings. The first contained the teachings of Tipnus Virili, the god of creation. The third part was called Luneva. It was the one Linnaeus read. It dealt with temptation and repentance, fused into a single whole, and sacrifice told of saints who saved people through 3 virtues. Followers of the Tiabgan faith read Luneva when they seek repentance. They are convinced that God purifies the soul through pain. If you feel pain while reading the scriptures, it may be a sign of sins that need to be atoned for and forgiven, said Sophia. Linnea swallowed hard, remembering that bath, the hands under her dress, the whispers and touches. Sophia stood over her, and Linnea sat on the sofa, staring at her knees so as not to meet her gaze, which could make her tell everything. In a few seconds, Sophia clenched her fingers into a fist. "His Excellency ordered you to study the Holy Scriptures, didn't he?" She slowly leaned toward Linnea, her eyes flashing red. "He meant that if you fail the test, you will leave this place, just like your predecessors." Linnea clutched her hand tightly, as if it were a lifeline, but did not cry out. "I won't let that happen. I'll do everything I can to stay," she whispered. She didn't want to go back to the basement, where it was damp and dark, where no one could hear her cries, and where she was forced to work even when she didn't have the strength to breathe. Tears rolled down her cheeks and she burst out, "What should I do? Please tell me, I'll do anything." Sophia ignored the tears and stories of fear, hearing only, "Anything." Later, they sat on the balcony, slowly sipping green tea to calm their nerves. Linnea leafed through the pages of a book, dressed all in white, so unlike the rest of her family, who preferred black. Tears threatened to well up in her eyes again. Even if they had sold her, this was a chance given to her by fate, and she had to take advantage of it. "Obviously, you have diligently followed the teachings of Tieg. Your soul has been cleansed of darkness," said Sophia. The girl couldn't believe it. She was ready to devote her whole life to Tiabal if it would help her survive. Restrictions on food and rest bear fruit. It is through excess that laziness and indifference arise, said Sophia, sipping her tea. "Maybe you should focus more on your responsibilities," she added. Linnea tried to hold back her tears. The news was good, but her conscience was tormenting her. She stood up abruptly and replied with a hint of irritation, "As you say, I have no choice anyway." Suddenly, the world spun. Her legs felt like cotton wool, and her head split from overexertion. Sophia looked at the girl in fear, afraid that something would happen to her. Linnea's vision blurred. Her eyelids grew heavy and unresponsive, and in a moment she fell to the floor, exhausted, powerless, unable to even move a finger. Some time passed, and Linnea was already lying in bed, with the boy standing next to her, watching anxiously as she lay with her eyes closed, not saying a word. It was Alexis. His eyes burned with anger at Sophia, because it was because of her that Linnea had fainted during class. "What did you do to her?" he asked. "I was just helping her with her duties," Sophia replied, pretending not to understand. Enough excuses, for heaven's sake, she fainted," Alexis snapped. Sophia rubbed her temples and muttered, "Come on, can't you really see who's not behaving properly here? And anyway, this woman's fate should not concern you," she added. Something tightened sharply in Alexis's heart, but he didn't show it. "Just like the other women before her, you won't be able to save this one either," said Sophia. The sun was shining outside. The Count was in the magnificent imperial palace of Inulik, where he was considered an honored guest among the most influential people. The Emperor, sitting on his throne, exclaimed joyfully, "Lord Mattei! How many years? How many winters?" The Count replied calmly and clearly, "My greetings, Your Majesty." The Emperor laughed and said, "Come now, "Spare me the formalities." But the Count replied firmly, "It is bad form not to show respect to the supreme ruler of the empire." With his back perfectly straight, he raised the emperor's hand and kissed the silver ring as a sign of deep respect. But as soon as he made this gesture, the Count suddenly felt a sharp pain. His eyes narrowed and his lips closed, holding back a groan. Looking at the emperor's hand, he saw the silver ring and realized that it was the ring that had left a painful burn on his lips. The emperor, noticing the redness, asked a little awkwardly, "Oh, do you have a wound?" The Count feigned indifference and replied, "It's nothing, not worth mentioning. I see you're wearing a new ring, a real masterpiece." The emperor smiled and said, "As always, you are extremely observant." Then he began to explain. The silver from which it is made was brought from distant lands, because as you know, our country is poor in this material. The Count kept his head bowed, listening attentively. Most of our reserves are still hidden in the north, but they are unsuitable for development due to the fragile structure of the surrounding environment. Suddenly, the emperor raised his voice sharply and exclaimed, "Of course! That's what they made me believe." The Count raised his head in confusion, hoping for an explanation. At that moment, a servant entered the hall and said, "Your Majesty, Noah Johnson of the Order of the Holy Knights requests an audience." The emperor replied, "Ah, wonderful, just in time. Let him enter." A young man in an elegant white suit with shiny blonde hair entered the room slowly but confidently. The Count glanced at Noah, but there was no hint of emotion on his face. He looked like a stone statue. Noah approached the throne, knelt on one knee, and said, "Greetings, Your Majesty. I was informed that you wished to see me." This was Noah Johnson, commander of the Holy Knights, a respected and highly educated man. The emperor said, "I could not ignore the information in the report, so I summoned the scribe to discuss it." The Count kept his eyes fixed on Noah, and when the scribe was mentioned, he looked up and their eyes met, as if light and shadow had met in the same room. Noah said, "Recently, our knights explored the northern lands on His Majesty's orders to check the area near the silver mines." He mentally recalled the terrain they had to traverse during the mission. There, his squad came across the remains of a ruined settlement. They surveyed the area and determined that it was still suitable for silver mining. He added, "I can only assume that development did not begin due to the lack of proper conditions for miners to work." The Count gave him a suspicious look, then turned to the emperor, whose anger was quite evident. The emperor slammed his fist on the table and thundered, "This is absolutely unacceptable. The citizens of the kingdom should not have to fear for their lives." His Majesty said, "The Holy Knights will remain in the north until the mines resume operation." "What do you say, Count?" The Count bowed in respect and replied, "I am grateful for your concern, Your Majesty, but as the ruler of these lands, I would prefer to take care of this myself." He added, "My brother Walter is the commander of the Imperial Knights. If you allow me to enlist his support, there will be more than enough help." Noah rose from his knees and said, "It's a pity. I was hoping that the help of the Holy Knights would be useful to you." Coming closer, he extended his hand and said, "If you ever need our support, we are always at your service." His cold, impenetrable face broke into a smile. The Count also smiled slightly and replied, "Thank you, Noah." Soon, the Count left the emperor's luxurious palace and talked to his brother on the street, who exclaimed in disappointment, "Does he really want to send his knights to the north?" Walter covered his face with his hand in annoyance and added, "Those damn arrogant dogs are getting more and more insolent." But, noticing that the Count was folding some fabric, he asked, "Are you going there too?" The Count put the cloth in the small front pocket of his jacket and replied, "Not at all." But he immediately added, "I didn't come all this way to miss the chance to meet him." Meanwhile, Noah, watching from a distance, said, "Looks like they're not coming back anytime soon." He continued, "Let's go to Matthew's estate while the Count is away." His companion exclaimed in astonishment, "The two of us?" Noah bowed his head and replied seriously, "Yes. We have to make sure he really married a human." He remembered the words God had spoken to man. "You must overcome sorrow and find enlightenment in order to save the wicked from disaster." The book depicted a man and a woman leading lost people out of darkness. These images shone with golden colors. Then it was written, "Sometimes only sacrifice can free you from the chains of the flesh." And then the promised land will open up to you. Alexis read these lines and muttered, "When sacrifice frees you from the chains of the flesh, doesn't that mean death?" Suddenly, he realized that he was the heir to the Matthew family, but knew so little about his own faith. Having read what he needed to, he remembered Sophia's words. In his memories, she stood over the bed and said, "The fate of this woman should not affect you, just like the fate of those who came before her." He remembered her saying, "You won't be able to save her." Alexis realized that he was unable to save his stepmother, so he should listen to Sophia and not get attached to her. He continued to ponder the writings that taught how to eradicate violence and turn one's own death into something good. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound, indistinct, but so insistent that it instantly caught Alexis's attention. He closed the book, placed it on the table, and went to see what was causing the disturbing noise. Meanwhile, his stepmother sat in the dark basement, among the overturned tables, watching Sophia and not understanding what was happening. She touched her lips with her fingers and said, "Why are you so surprised? Isn't this what you wanted?" Approaching, she added, "Isn't this what you wanted?" It is much easier to comprehend the teachings when it is difficult to adhere to the correct way of life. Sophia leaned toward Linnaeus and said, "You can always purify your soul through physical pain, as the ancient believers did. I will gladly help you with this." Linnea began to crawl backward, trying to avoid the pain, and whispered in a trembling voice, "You see, it's hard for me to get used to this." Sophia grabbed her by the shoulders and said sharply, "Really? This is the first time I've seen someone take so long to repent. What lustful thoughts are hidden behind those enchanting eyes?" She grabbed the girl by the chin, turned her face toward her, and looked straight into her eyes. She soon let go, but with a mocking smile said, "Well, your soul does not want to be cleansed." Sophia raised her hand and exclaimed, "I wonder how effective this method will be," and her hand swung sharply toward Linnea's face. The girl flinched, pressing her chin to her chest, preparing for the blow. But the blow never came. Someone caught Sophia's arm. It was Alexis. His teeth were chattering with rage, and he almost shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" He squeezed her arm with incredible force, demanding an answer. But Sophia seemed to take it as a game of endurance. She glanced at him and said ironically, "Oh, look, the knight in shining armor has arrived." Alexis glanced at Linnea. She was already trembling with fear, her eyes shining, and this shine only added fuel to the fire of his anger, which he was holding back so as not to hit Sophia. Sophia wrenched her hand from his iron grip. It hurt, but nothing could compare to what she could actually endure. Alexis, overcome with rage, shouted, "Get out of here now!" But these words only angered Sophia even more, and she replied defiantly, "How dare you talk to me like that?" Alexis coldly replied, "Have you forgotten who is the master of this estate while your father is away?" Sophia knew she had no chance against him, but the throbbing pain in her arm was already beginning to subside. He advised her to disappear from his sight and approached Linnea to help her. Alexis carefully bent down and lifted his stepmother off the floor. Then, bursting with anger, he said sharply, "You will regret your insolence, Sophie." Sophie's eyes burned with red anger. She was seething with rage at Alexis, but she was powerless because he was now in charge of the estate. They passed each other, but her gaze left a cold, unpleasant mark on him. The door slammed loudly as Sophia left the room, and everyone watched her with tense glances until she finally disappeared. Alexis turned to Linnea and asked quietly, "Are you okay?" He reached out to brush her hair away and see if there were any marks on her cheek, but she flinched and lowered her head. It had become a reflex. He carefully withdrew his hand and said, "Why didn't you tell me what they were doing to you?" "If only you had confessed." Linnea sighed, bowed her head, and replied quietly, in a disappointed tone, "But it's my duty as a countess." She recalled Sophia's words about sins and pain, and added, "When she said that, only one person came to mind. I tried to push those thoughts away because I felt like I was sinning." She continued, "But the pain that intensified every time I read the scriptures helped me realize that Alexis interrupted her. "Is there really nothing I can do to help you?" This excessive concern was beginning to annoy Linnea. He was her stepson, and it all seemed wrong. She said firmly, "When you act like this, my resolve weakens. I've already made up my mind. I'll endure these trials, no matter what happens." Alexis was stunned by her words. He didn't know what exactly Sophia had done to her, but now he was beginning to understand. Linnea couldn't hold back and started crying. She didn't want to seem weak, but she couldn't hold back the emotional pain. Alexis reached out his hands and said quietly, "Please don't cry." He added, "You have no idea how confused I am every time I see you. Even your smallest gestures confuse me." It wasn't true. His words didn't reflect his true feelings. In fact, he felt desperate and seemed ready to do anything to stop her tears. He touched Linnea's cheek, stroking it so gently that this gesture conveyed much more than just a stepson's concern for his stepmother. Tears streamed from Linnea's eyes. She was moved by these words, and she was no longer crying from pain. Alexis looked her straight in the eyes, and they stood there for a few seconds in silence, while thoughts raced through both their minds. But suddenly, he broke the golden silence and said, "I'll help you." Linnea didn't understand what he was talking about. How exactly was he going to help? But Alexis said firmly, "Let's leave this estate together, right now." And the next moment, they were running through the forest as fast as they could, without belongings, without a change of clothes, without food. Linnea, gasping for breath, asked herself, why did I listen to him in the first place? She didn't know what would happen when everyone found out about their escape. This thought lingered in her mind, causing her to doubt her decision. Linnea remembered Sophia's words, "You will regret your insolent behavior." Her burning red eyes, the beatings and bruises that remained after atoning for her sins. She wondered if she had done the right thing. Maybe it wouldn't change anything for her. But what about Alexis? Would he get in trouble for running away? Alexis returned to Linnea. His gaze betrayed his concern. She timidly asked, "What if we go too far? Will we have the strength to come back?" He squeezed her hand tighter and replied, "And if we do turn back, you won't regret it?" Then he added, "Let's just take a short walk, not too far." Soon Alexis remembered a place and smiled. "I'll show you a place that no one knows about except me." Linnea smiled. Those words sounded like a sign of trust, and she felt pleased. They set off together, and after a while, Alexis stopped. "We're here." An incredible view opened up before them. The sun was setting on the horizon. The forest was shrouded in thick fog, and everything looked as if they had stepped into a fairy tale or a painting by a famous artist. Linnea froze in awe, her eyes shining, and an enthusiastic "ah" escaped her lips. Alexis asked, "Do you like it here?" And she replied sincerely, "Of course. It's just wonderful here." She decided to justify her sudden change of heart about running away. Alexis said calmly, "As long as you're happy here, nothing else matters. But still, why did you decide to stay?" Linnea's eyes flashed, not with joy, but with embarrassment and shame. She knew she could answer later, but she tried to find words that would really convince him. Alexis squeezed her hand lightly, another gesture of support. His warm hand reminded her of the moment they first met. She looked at him with a gaze full of warmth and calm. Then she let go of his hand and moved closer to the edge of the cliff, asking, "Is that a village down there?" Alexis replied, "Yes, it belongs to our family. There's a festival there in the fall." She looked out as if trying to see something beyond the horizon, then exclaimed joyfully, "Really?" Alexis looked down and confirmed, "Yes, the Bachna festival." He began to explain. When the ice on the sea finally melts, people from other cities and countries come here, and trade continues for a whole month. During the festival, people of all ages and genders laugh all night long, chat animatedly, and spend time in noisy groups. That is why the holiday is called the Month of Eternal Light. Linnaeus found this name surprisingly poetic. The inhabitants of these lands were truly creative and knew how to surprise. She turned to Alexis and asked, "And what part of the festival is considered the most anticipated?" Alexis paused for a few seconds, lost in thought, but Linnea couldn't stand the silence and spoke up herself. She looked at him and said, "You must be close to Sophia?" Alexis replied sharply and clearly, "What? Not at all. Although she used to be nicer. In fact, he had no idea how to restore his former warm relationship with her." Linnea put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't worry, it happens in families, doesn't it?" But then she took her hand away and lowered her head. "Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that." Alexis gently took her hand in his and asked, "Why do you think that?" She sighed. "I'm a stranger in the Mattei family, and I'm not even a noblewoman. I come from a modest background." Suddenly, Alexis pulled her closer, touching her face with his fingers. Linnea whispered, "You still haven't asked why I decided to stay. Do you really want to know?" He didn't say a word, but his eyes clearly answered, "Yes." Then he quietly confessed, "If I had heard your story, my feelings for you would have become so strong that I would not have been able to give them up." He squeezed her hand tighter, as if afraid to let go. Linnea waited for him to continue. She felt him place her hand on his heart, and finally he whispered, "Despite everything, Linnea, I want to know everything about you." A few minutes later, they were already talking about her past. She spoke quietly. "I lived on the north coast." Vivid memories of a ship with huge white sails immediately came to mind. Her parents were anthropologists, and she always dreamed of accompanying them on their travels. She loved her parents dearly and sincerely hoped to grow up to be just like them. But then Linnea's life took a turn away from that happy path. On that fateful day, her parents died, and the girl's heart seemed to break with grief. She remembered standing on the deck when someone shouted, "Linnea! You worthless little girl! Can't you do things right? I was told that you made a mistake in your calculations." The woman wouldn't listen to any explanations and just beat Linnea, and those who saw it were horrified by her cruelty. and at the same time afraid to intervene. Perhaps there were those who tried to protect her, but Linnea did not dare to trust anyone or rely on anyone. One of the men who wanted to take her side just swallowed hard and backed away when her aunt yelled at him. The woman grabbed the girl's arm fiercely and dragged her away, shouting, after all, neither he nor the other crew members were family to her. She was often punished for her misdeeds, locked in the attic under the roof. There she would sit in the dark, praying, with only the moonlight illuminating her hands. She could only believe that one day she would grow up and then escape from this terrible place forever. It was painful and frightening, but she simply had no choice. She dreamed of escaping to start her own family, where she would be loved. That's why she wanted to stay here so badly now. Linnea already considered the Mattei estate her home and hoped to find love here. She still found it difficult to get used to the Tiabgan faith. What's more, his lordship and Sophia's strange methods frightened her a little, but she sincerely believed that if she became a powerful countess and a worthy woman, she would be able to build her own family. Alexis was silent. He was waiting to hear anything but that, and suddenly he understood. That was what it was. That strange feeling that haunted him every time he looked at Linnea. He realized that it would never bring him peace, as long as they played the game called family. Her sweet face was slowly driving him crazy, but now at least he knew why. But he couldn't tell her the truth. It would only hurt her feelings. So he said, "Of course I'll help you, if we become a family." Suddenly, a sharp pain gripped her chest. It was the same pain she had felt while reading the scriptures. She bent over and clutched her collarbone. But even so, she didn't want to spoil such an important moment. So she got up with an effort of will, and exhaling, said, "It's okay, don't worry, I'm fine." Linnea smiled and added, "I'm probably just a little tired." Alexis looked at her and suggested returning to the estate, where it would be more comfortable. She agreed, realizing that she couldn't bear to stay here any longer. So they headed back to rest. Evening quickly descended outside. They walked down the street side by side, talking quietly. Alexis asked, "Are you tired from walking?" And Linnea replied with a smile, "This walk is nothing compared to the exhausting work at the guild." The man looked at her and said, "Thank you for keeping me company until nightfall." Linnea was embarrassed by how sweet that sounded, but replied, "Don't mention it. I'm the one who should thank you for this day. It was truly unforgettable." Sophia stood on the roof nearby, watching them intently. Her voice sounded eager. "You look good, Alexis." Turning around, she noticed a statue that resembled the Virgin Mary, although it was really just a stone. Sophia stared at it for several minutes, as if expecting a miracle. Suddenly, a nice girl appeared nearby and also began to pray with Sophia. They held hands and looked tenderly at each other, but in a moment, the girl disappeared, leaving only a large pool of blood in her place. Sophia screamed in horror as she looked at the belt that remained of the girl. It seemed that it was all just a mirage caused by the statue. She slowly looked up at the statue, the culprit of this mirage. Then she clenched her fists tightly and hissed, "Laugh while you can. The full moon will soon rise." Soon the sky began to brighten. Linnea slept sweetly in her bed, smiling slightly in her sleep. The bright light made her open her eyes and look at the sky outside the window. She was trying to remember the last words from her dream when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Assuming it was her maid, she said, "Is that you, Margaret? You should have woken me up earlier." But it was not a servant who entered the room, but someone else. Alexis appeared in the doorway, neat and freshly dressed. He greeted Linnea, but she did not seem particularly pleased to see him. She instantly blushed with embarrassment, which covered her from head to toe. Alexis apologized, but Linnea only asked awkwardly, "What did you forget here this morning?" In fact, he just wanted to invite her to have breakfast together, and the girl was a little confused by such an unexpected proposal. Alexis smiled and said, "I told the servants not to disturb you. Sometimes you can allow yourself to linger in bed a little longer." Linnea was ready to sink through the floor with embarrassment. He asked, "Would you like me to ask the servants to prepare breakfast?" And she replied, "That would be wonderful." Nodding contentedly, Alexis said, "Then take your time, I'll wait," and left. Linnea fell back onto the pillows and thought irritably, "He was supposed to help me figure myself out, but instead, he's just confusing my feelings." Alexis also felt a slight tension, but he went to breakfast anyway. They ate breakfast on the balcony, where the sun gently touched their faces. While cutting the fish, Linnea asked, "Have you ever been to a chapel, Alexis?" He replied briefly, "Never in my life." The girl decided that perhaps His Highness forbade him to go there. But Alexis explained, "It's not about prohibition, he's just too devout." He remembered how, as a child, he often approached the door of that chapel. Every month, as he knew, their relatives gathered there, in the hall on the third floor. Little Alexis was standing at the door, When his father came out and noticed him, his father just leaned over and said quietly, "You're not ready for this yet." From then on, Alexis gave up hope and simply walked past the room without trying to enter. Linnea said thoughtfully, "So, he still thinks you're not ready? If you want to live up to his expectations, maybe you'll have to study hard, just like me." Alexis listened silently, lost in his own thoughts. When Linnea realized what she had just said, she felt terribly embarrassed. She hastened to add, "I was just joking." But suddenly, Alexis leaned closer and gently took her chin in his hand. He wiped his cheek against her face. Linnea felt his scent, the warmth of his fingers. At that moment, she felt everything. Alexis took a drop of cream from her skin and unexpectedly ate it. Linnea was shocked by his behavior, while Alexis calmly returned to his table. Noticing her confused reaction, he chuckled quietly and said, "Sorry, I just wiped the cream off your face. I shouldn't have done that." To make up for his guilt, he decided to change the subject and started talking about studying at the prayer house. Alexis sighed and said, "I can't neglect my studies just because I'm not interested. I'll inherit the title anyway, whether I want to or not." Linnea understood that he had many responsibilities and that it was not easy for him, but he really had no choice. Suddenly, Alexis suggested, "What if we read the scriptures together?" Linnea was delighted and said, "That would be much better than studying alone." Their hands touched involuntarily, and a quiet warmth spread between them. Alexis felt a little embarrassed. "I'm afraid I'll only get in your way," but Linnea smiled. "Then I'll work twice as hard." It was already getting dark outside, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the dark sky. Alexis, turning the pages, muttered, "I didn't just forget. I read this chapter a few days ago, but my mind is blank, as if everything has been erased." It annoyed him that he couldn't remember anything. He began to wonder why his father brought home new wives, and whether it was related to some ritual of the Tiabgan faith. Suddenly, he came across a familiar proverb, "Only those who are sacrificed on the border between life and death bear fruit." And then it hit him. He had not only read these words, but had seen it with his own eyes. He remembered the screams. 2 men were holding a woman, twisting her arms and legs so she couldn't move. That woman was Sophia. They were forcing her to eat something she categorically refused to touch. She begged them to let her go, but they just ordered her to be quiet and continued to force her. Sophia suddenly flinched, and Wagner, misjudging his strength, accidentally hit himself on the nose. The second man also cried out and recoiled in pain. Walter called Sophia a bitch and wiped the blood from his nose. But suddenly the Count thundered, "Enough, Walter!" He realized that he had to take the initiative, so he slowly approached Sophia and leaned toward her. Sophia sobbed, begging him to let her go and not hurt her. Suddenly, the Count grabbed Sophia's cheeks sharply, squeezing them so hard that he forced her to lift her face toward him. He said in a cold tone, "You must accept the fruit that has been nurtured by sacrifice." Then he added, "This is your destiny," and forcibly placed the fruit in her mouth. Sophia began to cough convulsively, trying to spit it out, but to no avail. The Count held her head, clenching her jaws so that she would swallow what he wanted her to. Little Alexis then covered his mouth with his hands so as not to scream. And since then, this horrific scene has never left his mind. Suddenly, someone touched his shoulder. It was Sophia, who wanted to make sure Alexis was okay and didn't need help. He said coldly and angrily, "Didn't I tell you, Sophia, not to get in my way when I'm angry?" Sophia smiled and replied calmly, "Don't exaggerate." She easily snatched the book from him, saying, "I'm sure you have a lot of questions for me, don't you?" Indeed, he had many questions. But would she tell the truth, or would she lie again? Sophia waited, but Alexis remained silent, wondering if he could trust her words at all. She came closer and said quietly, "I know you're interested in the ritual. Didn't you find it strange that Edward wouldn't let you attend the ceremony, or that you found it so difficult to study the scriptures?" Alexis grabbed her wrist sharply and squeezed it as hard as his conscience would allow. He croaked, "Then tell me, why do sacrifices bear fruit?" Sophia smiled slightly, not at all surprised by his outburst. "Isn't it obvious? If you take good care of your livestock, you will get the best product." She leaned closer and whispered, "Do you understand what I'm hinting at?" Then she added coldly, "You can't get attached to cattle that are destined to be slaughtered anyway." Alexis jumped up abruptly. "Linnea isn't just some animal. She's a member of our family." Sophia narrowed her eyes and replied curiously, "You have a strange attitude toward a member of the family, Alexis." He suddenly remembered the emotions, the frantic beating of his heart when Linnea was near. Sophia tried to pressure him, to gain the moral upper hand. Meanwhile, Linnea came out of the shower, drying her wet hair with a towel. She saw a note on the table, apparently from Alexis. I noticed something strange while reading the scriptures. I know it's late, but come to my room. At that moment, Alexis was arguing with Sophia, telling her never to bring up the subject again. And then Sophia decided to act really cruelly. Slowly approaching Alexis, she whispered, "What if your father found out? What fate would await her then?" Oh dear Alexis, it will backfire on you if you react like this every time I mention her name. She ran her fingers lightly over his chest, as if teasing him. Moving even closer, Sophia added with feigned sadness, "The inability to control one's emotions. Isn't that the most terrible flaw for a loyal Tiabgan?" Alexis' pen and notepad fell to the floor. Sophia pushed him sharply onto the bed and straddled him. Alexis almost shouted, demanding that she get off him immediately, but Sophia leaned over and whispered, "Quiet, I just want to help you." She ran her fingers over his buttons and whispered, "Calm down." Alexis tried desperately to push her away, but she leaned in even closer, not letting him move her. Suddenly, his eyes widened and his arms went limp. He froze, as if in a trance, confused and devastated at the same time. Linnea stood in the doorway. She covered her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming and crying. Sophia beamed with satisfaction, while Alexis was stunned that Linnea had seen everything. Meanwhile, the Count was riding home in his carriage. He was irritated and could barely contain his anger. Clenching his fist, he hissed, "Damn ignoramuses!" His thoughts returned to the events of a few hours ago, to the Chancellor's estate. Then an unknown man slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "What does he think he's doing? Making us wait! We've been sitting here for hours with nothing to do." That man was Walter, and the Count had to calm his hot-headed brother down. Suddenly, the door creaked, attracting the attention of both the Count and Walter. The stranger peered through the half-open door and said to the girl behind him, "If I don't come back from this room for a long time." He didn't have time to finish his sentence. The Count slammed the door, forcing him to come in. The man nodded to the Chancellor, trying to greet him, but the latter looked frightened and did not want to talk at all. The Chancellor said cautiously, "Mr. Matthew, I didn't expect to see you here." The Count decided not to waste any time and immediately asked, "How serious is the situation?" The man sighed and replied, "Worse than you can imagine." The Count closed the door and leaned calmly against the wall, saying, "As you know, the Holy Knights are directly subordinate to the Emperor, so they are obliged to carry out his orders flawlessly." The Chancellor became visibly anxious and replied in a trembling voice, "Now that they have found the settlement of Silburn, it is only a matter of time before they learn the truth about these lands." The Count frowned and then asked, "Even about those who gave the order to attack the peaceful population?" Caspar sighed. "They have no direct evidence, but their suspicions are becoming more and more convincing. Perhaps very soon they will piece together the whole picture." He added, "If it wasn't some beast from outside the border, then the only one in the north with enough power to destroy everything there is you. Isn't that right?" The Count understood that there was some truth in Caspar's words, but was he ready to go through with it and destroy all traces? Caspar continued, "You could lose your title for the mass extermination of civilians, but there is a chance to avoid the worst." And then he said something that made the Count freeze. "The Emperor wants the silver mines. If you offered him the mining rights," but the Count suddenly exploded. "Stop talking nonsense, Caspar!" he continued to thunder. "First, he lured our family into the wilderness, and now he wants to suck all the resources out of it." Caspar backed into a corner in fear, curling up like a cornered animal. The Count loomed over him and hissed menacingly, "After all the help we've given you, I hope you're not just going to sit here with your arms folded." Caspar was shaking so hard he couldn't utter a word. But then, gathering his strength, he exclaimed, "You're wrong!" And he added, "Everything in this empire has always belonged to the Inalake family. Don't forget that those lands belong to His Majesty, not to you." Recalling this conversation, the Count felt himself boiling over again. How dare he say such a thing? He remembered the gifts that Caspar had received over the years, and now he dared to claim that these lands did not belong to him, but to the Emperor. The Count promised himself that he would unite even with those scoundrels, only if there was no other choice. Meanwhile, Linnea was stunned by what she saw. She couldn't believe her eyes. Sophia and Alexis. She guessed what they were about to do, but was afraid to even admit it to herself. And suddenly, she felt anxiety and a chilling cold envelop her. Linnea turned and rushed out of the room so she wouldn't have to hear any excuses. She didn't want to listen to anything. She was sure that Alexis had left the note, and she didn't understand why he had called her, forcing her to see it. Hearing him call her name, she jumped up and ran even faster. Alexis tried to explain, shouted, begged her to stop, but Linnea ran into the darkness, and with each step she took, his hope faded more and more. Alexis continued to run after her, but suddenly realized where she was going and shouted, "Don't go there, stop!" But Linnea stumbled and fell hard, hitting her hand on the stone floor. She didn't stop, just rubbed the bruised spot convulsively, trying to distract herself from the pain. And suddenly, what appeared before her eyes shocked her to the tips of her fingers. In the old portrait hung a woman who was her exact copy, like a mirror image. Linnea froze, staring at the canvas. When Alexis finally caught up with her, she sat silently for a few seconds, then whispered, "Who is this?" Alexis was silent at first. He didn't want to reveal the truth, but he couldn't hide it anymore. He came closer and said quietly, "It's a portrait of my mother." And Linnea's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Now it became clear to her why he had talked about his family at the ceremony, why he had always been there for her, why he had been so tender. It was all because of his mother. Everything suddenly became so obvious that she wanted to laugh at her own naivety. Alexis was just grieving for his mother, not for her. He tried to explain something, but Linnea didn't want to listen to him anymore. She interrupted him sharply. "All this time you've been lying to me." Alexis replied irritably, "Lied? How can you say that about me?" But she didn't want to hear any more excuses. It wasn't the first time someone had done this to her. She was used to betrayal because it had happened more than once. Linnea remembered her boyfriend's betrayal that distant day on the deck. Then she was called to dinner, and she happily ran downstairs. One of the men teased her. "Weren't you supposed to meet your boyfriend?" She blushed and muttered, "Stop teasing me. He's not my boyfriend yet." Another sailor smiled. "How wonderful to be young and in love." Linnea agreed and ran to her boyfriend at the time. When she saw him, she was delighted, thinking for a moment that he might have been waiting for her. But in the next second, the illusion was shattered. She found him with another girl. They were kissing. That girl turned out to be Linnea's cousin. Seeing this, Linnea was stunned. Her cousin was so skilled at flirting with the boy, and it was like a stab in the back. She couldn't believe that she could do such a thing, but fairy tales don't happen, and what's done is done, her cousin asked with feigned surprise. "But you were courting Linnea, weren't you?" The boy laughed and replied, "I was just using her to get closer to you. I don't need some orphan." Linnea covered her mouth with her hand so as not to scream in pain across the deck. Returning her thoughts to the present, she realized that the same thing had happened with Alexis. She called herself stupid and naive, because deep down she had known the truth from the very beginning. Linnea understood that she would never become a woman of noble birth, whom society could be proud of. And she knew that, to Alexis, she was only a legal stepmother, not a woman. She wanted to be a family to someone, but even that was impossible here. Wiping away her tears, the girl sobbed, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you." She added, "I'm sorry for invading your personal space. Next time, I'll knock before entering your room." Alexis flared up. "Do you really think there's something between me and Sophia? Why won't you just listen to me?" And then he suddenly shouted, "The only one I care about is you, Linny." She lowered her head and began to cry again, then whispered softly, "I know you're lying." Then she cried out, "Enough of these sweet words to confuse me even more. You don't need me. I'm just an orphan. I have no honor, no name." She was sure that he didn't need her, but his mother, his real family. Linnea's words seemed to break Alexis. He whispered imploringly, "Don't say that." And then he added, "You have no idea how bad I feel right now." He slowly leaned toward her, as if he was going to kiss her, but she stopped him and asked, "Have you ever seen me as family? Not as someone's copy, but as the real me?" Linnea brushed away the strands of hair that fell across his face as he was still holding her waist. Alexis tensed and confessed, "All this time, I never considered you family." Linnea tried to pull away, realizing that he didn't need her, but he pulled her closer and whispered, "I thought that too at first. I thought I was drawn to you only because of your resemblance to my mother." Alexis paused for a moment, searching for the words to express everything that was spinning around in his head. Finally, he whispered, "But your smile, it's unlike any other, so bright that it's impossible to capture on canvas, and so enchanting that it brings peace to everyone around you." Linnea's eyes glistened with tears. These words touched her deeply, and the distance between them became so small that she no longer felt any boundaries. And then Alexis kissed her. Linnea didn't resist, although she was stunned. Her heart was pounding as if it wanted to burst out of her chest. "I realized," he whispered, "that the feelings I have for you are not at all like longing for my stepmother." He remembered their old conversation about family and had doubts. He had lied then, but only because he didn't want to destroy her hope of having a real, loving family. Alexis realized that he had been deceiving himself all this time, and he understood how much he had hurt the girl by destroying her belief in a happy future. Linnea was moved to tears. She thought she had no right to rejoice at such words because her stepson loved her. It was wrong, strange, and at the same time painfully sweet, but she didn't care about anything except one thing. Now she knew the truth. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around his neck and pulled him closer, and in the next moment, she kissed him herself because she knew he wanted only her, no one else, only her voice, her scent, her smile, her presence. It was dark outside, but the moonlight was shining especially brightly that night. Meanwhile, Sophia left the estate to meet the Count. She approached the carriage, opened the door, and said, "I was waiting for your return, sir." The Count looked gloomy and said curtly, "I did not expect honors from my wife, but why did Alexis not meet me here?" Sophia noted that Alexis was indeed absent, but deep down she guessed where he might be. From the depths of the corridor came faint creaks and muffled moans. It was Alexis and Linnea. They were kissing, unable to stop, and with each breath, their passion grew stronger. Alexis picked her up by the hips and pressed her against the wall. Their lips merged in a hot kiss. He smiled slightly and asked, "You don't regret it?" Linnea remained silent, and he began to feel anxious. What if she did regret it? But instead of words, she just kissed him tenderly again. They remained locked in each other's arms for a few more moments before deciding to take their passion to the bedroom. In the heat of their kisses, they entered Linnea and Graf's bedroom, which belonged only to the two of them that night. Kisses rained down like sparks, and the thin thread on her dress was already untied. Alexis slowly moved his lips from her mouth to her delicate neck. His kisses moved lower until he laid her down on the bed. He hovered over her, demonstrating his strength and masculine determination. When he pulled off his shirt, Linnea gasped. His body was strong and toned, like marble. Her shirt fell easily to the floor, and Alexis continued what he had started. Touching his skin, she felt a chill, soft and tremulous, causing her hands to bend of their own accord. He took her hand and kissed it so tenderly that it conveyed absolute confidence. Linnea still couldn't believe that this was really happening. She had never experienced anything like this before, and her heart was pounding with excitement. Alexis whispered, "You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." His gaze slid over her figure, to her corset, to the ribbon hanging down over her chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him close. Their lips melted into a passionate kiss, as if they hadn't seen each other in an eternity and had finally met again. She held tightly to his neck, and at the same time, their hands slowly removed their clothes. Alexis covered her with kisses lower and lower. He gently pulled Linnea closer, and then a lock quietly clicked on her leg. The girl froze. The bell was a symbol of her fidelity to the Tibetan faith and to her husband, the Count, and now she was betraying him. The promise she had made at the ceremony flashed through her mind. Her breathing became ragged. Her heart beat wildly. Alexis looked at the lock and asked anxiously, "Could it be my father's whim? Did he force you to wear it?" Linnea turned away, not wanting to meet his gaze. She hoped that would stop him, but he was not going to give up. Alexis knelt down and said firmly, "Then I'll rip it off by force." But as soon as he leaned toward the lock, the girl cried out sharply, "No, don't!" After a short pause, she added more quietly, "If you break it by force, we'll be exposed." Alexis froze for a moment, surprised by her seriousness. After all, he only wanted to prove that his words were sincere. Alexis was about to say something when loud, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. It was the Count. He came almost to the door of his bedroom, where Linnea and Alexis were now standing. When the door handle clicked, they both froze, their hearts pounding, expecting a scream and an inevitable scandal. The Count slowly entered the room, his gaze sweeping across the interior, and alarm flashed in his eyes. Something was wrong. He stopped in the middle of the room, trying to understand why his instincts were insistently whispering of danger. Linnea, suppressing her panic, turned to him with a smile. "Welcome back, sir. I didn't expect to see you today." The Count did not respond to her smile, but asked sharply, "Where were you just now?" The girl hesitated, but finally said, "I was in the bathroom." His gaze slowly slid over her from head to toe. For a moment, he lingered on her chest, and the bow she was nervously twisting with her fingers, trying to appear calm. Suddenly, the Count lunged forward and began to search her. He felt her neck as if looking for something specific, but found nothing, which surprised him because his intuition had never failed him before. His gaze fell on the bed, where the blanket was gathered in an unnatural fold, as if someone were lying there. Without hesitation, he walked decisively toward the bed. Linnea began to panic. her eyes darting around, her breathing uneven, her hands trembling. The Count abruptly pulled back the covers, but to his surprise, there was no one there. Although everything pointed to the girl hiding something, she had clearly taken care to leave no traces. There was a sudden loud knock at the door. Walter came in and said calmly, "Brother, Sophia wants to talk to you." The Count grimaced irritably. He didn't like being interrupted at that moment. Glancing once more at Linnea, whose eyes were filled with anxiety, he paused for a moment. Finally, he said dryly, "Good night, wife." Linnea replied confusedly, "Oh, you too." As soon as the door closed behind him, a relieved smile appeared on her face. She had managed to fool the Count. Exhausted by the tension, she collapsed onto the floor, whispering to herself, "I don't know if I can continue to hide my feelings for Alexis." Meanwhile, Alexis himself was already standing below, looking up at the balcony he had just jumped from. A scene flashed in his mind of Linnea looking at him in panic when she heard footsteps. She pushed him and cried out, "What should we do, Alexis?" Alexis tried to calm Linnea down, but she was so distraught that his words were lost in the whirlpool of her panic. Then he said quietly, "Calm down, I'll just escape through the balcony. Don't worry, he won't find out." Linnea bit her lip. She was scared. She understood that this was indeed the best solution, but whispered, "It's too risky. It's not that I don't trust you, but what we've done." Alexis hugged her, pressing her gently and warmly against him, as if trying to protect her from the whole world. Tears welled up in her eyes. She realized the risk Alexis was taking to keep their secret. He whispered, "We'll just be honest with each other. We haven't done anything wrong." He added, "I understand how scared you are, but I have to stay calm. Only God can decide what is right and what is wrong." He leaned closer. "So I ask you, until heaven's verdict is delivered, don't close your heart." They kissed, and Alexis thought, "I will protect you, Linny, even if I have to go against my own father." Night had already fallen on the estate when the Count entered his room. Sophia was standing by the window, and he watched her, trying to understand why he had been summoned. Without turning around, she said, "I'm afraid, sir, that Alexis may stand in our way." The Count raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean?" Sophia replied slowly. "You should have seen how he took care of your wife while you and Walter were away." She told him that she had seen Alexis and Linnea trying to escape from the estate for good. Walter burst out laughing, while the Count, on the contrary, was filled with rage and almost exploded with anger. Clenching his jaw, he muttered, "The first ritual is approaching." Sophia ran her fingers across the cold windowpane and said, "Yes, the first moon of repentance will rise tonight." The Count straightened his back and said sternly, "Sophia, make sure Alexis participates in the rituals from now on. I will show him myself what duties each of my heirs must perform." Sophia smiled slyly. "Of course, sir." What a wonderful idea. The sky was covered with gray clouds, and, as always, a strange, almost mystical atmosphere hung around the old castle. The whole family gathered at the long table, enjoying breakfast, while Sophia bustled around the room, fulfilling her host's every wish. Linnea slowly savored her food, never taking her eyes off Alexis. He didn't seem to mind the attention, returning her gaze with his own. The Count paused and said, "I think this is the first time we've all gathered at the same table like this." His brother smiled and replied, "Yes, it's a little late." The Count's brother seemed both strange and familiar to Linnaeus, and suddenly she remembered. She had seen him that night with the Count. Suddenly, Alexis' voice brought the girl back to reality. He asked, "Sophia told me to join you for breakfast. Did you want to say something?" The Count put his fork down on his plate and said, "It's been almost a month since your stepmother arrived." Alexis listened suspiciously as his father added, "On the last day of the penitential period, we will hold her inauguration." The Count insisted that Alexis be present, but the boy just looked at him in surprise. Not understanding what he was hearing, the Count continued, "As my heir, you must begin to master your duties." The look on Alexis's face showed that his father's words did not bring him joy. He just looked at him strangely, but he did not dare to contradict the Count, so he nodded and said, "Of course, I will come." Linnea noticed his reaction and wondered, why is he so embarrassed? Shouldn't he be happy that his father has finally allowed him to participate in the rituals? Suddenly, Alexis nudged her gently with his elbow. He passed her a small note, doing so as discreetly as he could. Unfolding it, she read, "Meet me in the backyard after dinner." These words did not comfort Linnea very much. Worrying thoughts began to swarm in her head, but despite everything, she trusted Alexis. At that moment, she suddenly noticed Walter's suspicious glance. He was drinking wine, but his piercing red eyes left a heavy mark on Linnea's memory. Meanwhile, the fog outside began to dissipate, and the sky gradually brightened. Linnea walked slowly down the estate's alley, looking around as if she were afraid of being watched. Suddenly, someone grabbed her arm, and she cried out in fear, "Alexis!" The boy gently pulled her toward him and hugged her. Linnea sighed with relief and said, "You scared me. I was afraid someone else had left that note." Alexis replied calmly, "I'm sorry. I was worried about how we said goodbye yesterday. I'm fine, but you looked troubled. Did something happen?" She snuggled up to his chest and whispered, "It's nothing." Alexis slowly tilted her head and said softly, "Being this close to you is like a dream." He leaned toward her, closing the distance between them. Linnea felt his warm breath on her lips and longed for that kiss. But suddenly, Walter's voice shattered the moment. "Miss Linnea? Are you there?" The frightened girl whispered for Alexis to run away immediately, but he shook his head. "I won't leave you here alone." Linnea whispered, "It will be worse if they see us together. Go, quickly." Meanwhile, Walter slowly approached, looking at the edge of her dress visible from the side. He stopped in front of her and asked, "There you are. Why are you so scared?" Then he narrowed his eyes. "Maybe you weren't here alone?" Linnea replied, embarrassed. "Were you looking for me? I'm afraid I don't even know your name." Walter smiled. "Oh, right. I don't think I've introduced myself yet." He took her hand and said, "I am the younger brother of Count Edward Mattei, Walter Mattei." His gaze made Linnea feel awkward and extremely uncomfortable next to him. She gently freed her hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Walter." And the man replied, "Please, just call me by my first name." Linnea looked at him in surprise, but he immediately interrupted. "Actually, I'm not here to exchange pleasantries." Walter took a folded note out of his pocket. With a sly smile, he waved it in front of her face and said, "It looks like you've lost something. I wanted to give it back to you." When Linnea recognized Alexis's note, she froze, unable to utter a word. She was sure she had gotten rid of the note, thrown it into the farthest trash can on the estate, so that no one would find it. How then did it end up in Walter's hands? Walter shook his finger and said, "Such indecent behavior is not at all befitting of a count's respectable wife." He narrowed his eyes and added, "Who is this insolent scoundrel who dared to set his sights on the countess?" Linnea tried not to rise to the provocation, and, gathering what confidence she had left, replied calmly, "I don't understand what you mean." Walter took a step closer and waved the note again. "Oh, I'm sure of the opposite," he continued. "What do you think my brother will say when he sees this note, Countess?" This piece of paper had already caused so many problems that Linnea was ready to run away as far as possible, just to avoid dealing with this gloomy giant who frightened her with his height and firm voice. Walter bowed his head and said with feigned calm, "So? Should I show this little secret to my brother? Do you think he'll like it?" Linnea suddenly lost her confidence. She began to stutter. Her legs felt like cotton wool, and her stomach churned with shame and fear. Walter was getting closer and closer. Suddenly, he leaned toward her ear and whispered, "Listen carefully." For a few seconds, he spoke quietly, without taking his eyes off the walls of the estate, as if he knew who might be listening. Linnea turned pale, her eyes filled with such horror that Alexis, who was standing nearby, became alarmed. Finally, Walter added quietly, "But I must admit, I find it much more interesting." His cold gaze slid toward the forest, where fog still swirled, and behind it, the estate was visible. He seemed to have said everything he wanted to say. Turning abruptly, he threw over his shoulder, "Goodbye," and headed back to the estate. Linnea was left alone in the middle of the forest, her face deathly pale and her hands trembling as if from an electric shock. She whispered softly, "He knows about our relationship. We should have been more careful." Suddenly, Alexis's familiar voice rang out behind her. Coming closer, he asked anxiously, "Are you okay? You look pale." Glancing at the note in her hands, Alexis exhaled heavily and said, "Did he find it?" Linnea said guiltily, "I was sure I threw it away. I didn't think he would be able to find it. I'm sorry." Alexis replied gently, "Don't worry. He's always had a morbid interest in all of his father's wives." He calmly took the note from her and crumpled it in his hand, as if erasing the very memory of her. Alexis, trying to calm the girl down, said, "After all, he didn't see us together, so he can only guess." He put his arm warmly around her shoulders. Feeling his support, Linnea leaned against him. For Alexis, this warmth and comfort were so familiar and special that he didn't want the moment to end. Outside the window, it was still a clear day. While the maids were doing Linnea's hair, she thought, "Alexis was right. I don't know why, But Mr. Walter never told the Count what he found out. Several days passed, and no one approached her with any questions, which was both frightening and alarming. Suddenly, a maid approached her and said, "My lady, His Excellency asked me to give you a message." Linnea tensed, but the maid continued, "You must prepare for the service, which will take place at midnight. You must clear your mind and body." These words made Linnea feel as if the Count was actually looking at her right now. She entered a cozy, warm room, filled with the scent of flowers and steam rising from water. Linnea smiled and whispered, "It's so warm here, just as I remember." She remembered an event that had happened here not long ago. At that time, she was too excited to think about swimming, but today, she was finally able to relax. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. "Linnea?" She jumped and exclaimed, "Oh, Alexis!" The young man stood confused in the middle of the bathroom, not knowing what to do. Linnea looked away and said quietly, "I'm sorry. I thought no one was here." Her cheeks flushed, and she added, "I broke in again while you were washing here." Alexis gently turned her face toward him. His gaze softened, and he said, "I came to cleanse my body for the ritual, just like you." Linnea's face burned with embarrassment, and the warm air made her cheeks even hotter. Letting go of her chin, he added quietly, "After what happened last time, you must feel awkward." Then he turned around and said calmly, "I'm done, so you can wash up." Linnea suddenly exclaimed, "Wait!" But then Walter's words came to mind. Then he said quietly, "Since your first ritual is coming up soon, it's better not to look for adventure. Unless, of course, you want trouble." The memory of those words made her heart beat faster with anxiety. She clenched her hand into a fist, not daring to catch up with Alexis. Linnea wanted to tell him that she was fine, but deep down she was afraid. Afraid that one day their secret would be revealed. Meanwhile, Alexis had already left the bathroom and headed to the bedroom to get dressed. But Linnea wanted so badly to just touch him, to feel his warmth, his scent, his body. Suddenly, the boy felt a light blow to his back. It was Linnea. She hugged him tightly from behind, not wanting to let go, as if she wanted him to never leave her. Her arms squeezed him even tighter, as if trying to stop time. Alexis froze in surprise at this sudden display of emotion. Then Linnea whispered softly, "Won't you stay with me, Alexis?" Night had already fallen outside. Meanwhile, in the forest, two men were walking side by side and talking. One asked, "Don't you want to take command for a while, Evan?" Red-haired Evan grumbled, "This is no time for jokes. That idiot Walter hasn't even started searching." It was clear that both were tired and annoyed by Walter's behavior. Suddenly, Evan spoke more seriously. "Regarding the information you're interested in, we have a witness," he explained. The witness saw a young woman heading to the estate a month ago. His blonde-haired partner asked, "A month ago?" He seemed to remember something. Looking at the moon, he said quietly, "The first month of repentance rises and disappears on the eve of the 29th. Then he suddenly exclaimed, "That woman is in danger!" The night grew even darker. Meanwhile, the Count and Linnea walked down the corridor in complete silence. She scanned the walls, hoping to see Alexis somewhere. Suddenly, the Count spoke to his wife. Turning to face her, the Count asked, "Have you followed the laws of the Tiabgan faith?" Linnea froze in confusion, mentally scrambling. When was the last time I even read their writings? She remembered how she had begun to grow closer to Alexis, how she asked him to stay, deliberately pretending not to realize her sin. She still didn't know whether she should confess this. Linnea unconsciously bit her lip, and then quietly, with a tremor in her voice, she replied, "Of course." The Count raised his eyebrows in surprise and said, "Really?" He opened the heavy door, and inviting her inside, said, "I hope you won't disappoint our family." With trembling hands, Linnea stepped into the hall, where quite a few people had already gathered. All eyes turned to the Count and Linnea as they entered. The Count strode confidently toward the statue, while his wife followed behind, furtively glancing at the relatives present. Alexis's gaze met hers. It was filled with concern and sympathy. Suddenly, the Count said, "Please stand there." Linnea obediently moved forward, and he explained, "This statue was created in the image of the Tiabgan pilgrim." He continued, "If a stranger wishes to become part of our family, he must prove during the first ritual that he has cleansed himself of all unholy thoughts and desires." Linnea stopped on the stone slab, and the Count added, "If you have sincerely accepted the Tiabgan faith, the pilgrim will shed tears of repentance for you." Then he commanded, "Place your hand and cheek on her statue." The girl silently raised her hand, but her palm trembled terribly. She could not muster the strength to touch the stone. Memories of Alexis flooded her mind. His breath, his warmth, his embrace. Finally, Linnea touched the statue, but the pilgrim did not shed a single tear. She remained motionless. The Count began to get angry quickly. Looking at Linnea, he exclaimed angrily, "Sophie, what does this mean?" Sophia exclaimed, "I'm sorry, but I was sure. How is this possible? You studied the scriptures for hours." But suddenly, someone stopped her decisively. It was Alexis. He grabbed Sophia by the arm, preventing her from getting any closer. The Count looked at his son and said sternly, "Indeed, now is not the time for quarrels." He took out his belt and continued, "Those who have not repented of their sins will not bear fruit, but we can wash away their guilt until the Lord is satisfied." These words sent a chill through Linnaeus. Fear gripped his chest. The Count ordered, "Tie her up," and Walter immediately grabbed Linnea by the arm. He roughly pulled her toward the statue and tied her arms around it. The girl tried to say something, but Walter only tightened the knots. Alexis shouted, "What are you doing? You can't!" His gaze met Linnea's eyes, which glistened with pain and pleas for help. Suddenly, the belt whipped through the air. The gesture seemed unbearably cruel to Alexis. In an instant, the skin on the girl's back burned with pain as the belt fell sharply on her. The tears flowed even faster. A quiet cry escaped Linnea's lips. She trembled, feeling every blow, but tried with all her might to stand her ground. But suddenly the blows stopped, and the girl turned her head to see what had happened. Alexis was standing in front of her. He had grabbed the belt, stopping his father's swing. His hands trembled with tension, and his eyes flashed with resentment and anger. It all started when he saw his father hitting Linnea. Alexis knew that if he didn't intervene, she would continue to suffer this pain. But he also noticed that none of his relatives even moved to stop the Count. And then he realized that only he could save her. The thought involuntarily flashed through his mind. So it turns out that only Linnea and I didn't know the true meaning of this ritual. At that moment, Walter put his hand on his shoulder and asked quietly, "Can you feel it, nephew?" Turning his head toward Walter, Alexis heard him hiss, "The same pleasure that comes with every crack of the whip?" It seemed that Walter took sick pleasure in watching the girl Alexis loved suffer. The boy's heart was pounding wildly, and Walter, as if hearing its beats, just smiled. But there was no room for such cruelty in Alexis's heart. He was tormented only by the thought that Linnea was in danger. He abruptly pulled his shoulder out of his uncle's grasp and thought with a cry, "I'm not like you!" Alexis grabbed the whip again and clenched it tightly in his hands. Looking at his father, he cried out, "Father, please stop!" The Count glared at his son, his jaw clenched tightly. Pulling the whip toward him, he growled, "How dare you interfere with me?" The whip suddenly slipped from Alexis's hands. A thin trickle of blood ran down his cheek from the blow. The young man slowly looked at the red drop. Feeling a slight burning sensation, he looked at his father in confusion and whispered, "Father?" Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of heels clicking. It was Sophia. She approached Linnea and said calmly, "She's unconscious. Do you want me to wake her up?" The Count pushed his son away sharply, snapping, "Get away!" He took Linnea's limp arm and laid her cheek against the stone statue of the Tiabgan pilgrim. Suddenly, tears began to flow from the stone face, a sign that Linnea had sincerely accepted the Tiabgan faith. The Count breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Excellent. The service is now complete. Take her away." Sophia carefully lifted the girl and carried her to the exit in her arms. Alexis silently watched the unconscious Linnea as she was carried away. When Sophia walked past him, her gaze was dismissive. Here he was a nobody, just like his girlfriend. Alexis's fist clenched sharply, his nails digging into his palm. He looked up at his father and said quietly, "All these years, is that how you treated people? No? The brides you brought here?" The Count slowly turned to his son and said coldly, "What do you care? You know we're not like other people. We're special." Leaning closer, he added, "Look how quickly your wound is healed." Alexis mechanically looked at the traces of blood, and the Count continued, "The reason our family has retained control over our instincts and at the same time retained extraordinary strength is the seed of blood. It can only be obtained from pure victims." The Count spoke in an even voice. "Repentance, atonement, sacrifice. Only those who conscientiously follow God's commandments can grow this priceless gift." These words pierced Alexis, but his father added, "And to reap this fruit, you must sacrifice someone." The words he had heard swirled in the boy's head, and he whispered in horror, "Only those who are sacrificed on the brink of life and death give this fruit. Are you saying that this is not just an old metaphor?" And suddenly, it dawned on him. This metaphor meant Linnea's death. She had to be sacrificed. The Count replied sharply, "Wake up! You are the only one to blame. You closed your eyes to reality, even though you could have learned the truth yourself long ago." Alexis still could not comprehend the meaning of his father's words. Then the Count calmly asked, "Why do you think I called you to this ritual today?" Alexis replied in surprise, "Because I am ready to join you," the Count said with a cold smile. "No, you are not ready yet." A depressing feeling of guilt spread through Alexis's chest, as if he himself were to blame for Linnea's impending death. The Count paused for a moment, then said quietly, quietly, "This woman, Linnea, she is ready. Don't you understand what is happening?" Alexis shook his head, and then his father said, "She will be sacrificed to create a seed of blood intended specifically for you, Alexis."